We're continuing our series we started this last week called The Exodus. And what we're doing is we're moving through the it's the early years that you see in the text, but it's the first 80 years of Moses' life. But what we're doing is this. Moses, if you know anything about the Bible, he's kind of like this big figure of the Bible, Moses. You see him in TV, movies, and things like that. And what I want you to understand through this series is this. Moses didn't just become Moses. Moses went through the same trial and errors that we all go through, the same process we all have to go through to escape the trappings of this world and actually become a productive worker for the kingdom of God. And that's what we're looking at through this 5-week series is the process he went through, escaping the world and kind of becoming a productive worker for God. And last week what we did is we covered Exodus chapters 1 and chapter 2, and that kind of covered these things. It covered his birth, how he was born. It covered his adoption into the Egyptian royal family. We went through his kind of choosing to be associated with the Hebrews, the slaves, the people of Israel, rather than to be known as a prince of Egypt, and his kind of choice to be associated with God's people. And eventually we saw his fleeing of Egypt. That's where we left it last week, as he eventually kills the Egyptian slave driver. People find out about it. He's driven out of Egypt, and he runs to the wilderness, which I told you was the worst decision he could ever do because it's not worth camping out. Just let him kill him. But hey, that was his choice, and that's what he chose to do. I would have just stayed and died. But he left and went to the wilderness to camp it out. And what we talked about was this. The first step of becoming a productive kingdom worker was this. It's choosing to be associated with God and choosing to live for God rather than choosing to live for this world. That was the first step we looked at last week that we learned from Moses. Today, we're going to pick things up in Exodus chapters 3 and chapter 4. And this is where he flees to the wilderness in the next stage of his life. And what we will see is this. In this next stage, he faces a new challenge. And it's no longer being associated with God or the Egyptians or the world. It now becomes this. His next challenge is he has to deal with his own personal fears. He's going to have to deal with the fears that are going to be put in his brain and in his mind over the coming years when God speaks to him. What I often say here at church is this. God didn't save you just so you could be saved and you could walk around and say, hey, look, I'm a Christian. God also saved you with an expectation to go this. I expect to be able to use your life in service of my kingdom for the rest of your days. That's what we see God's expectation is. But what we will find is this. Many times when God calls us to serve, the next thing that sets in is this, fear. Fear starts to set in because what it does is God starts to call us out of our comfort level, out of our comfort zones, and into something new. And usually fear sets in those minutes. And what we see in the story of Moses is this. That's exactly what happens to him. Moses leaves Egypt. So he flees Egypt. They kind of kick him out. They're trying to kill him. He flees into the wilderness. And what we see is for the next 35 years, he kind of just starts a normal routine that most of us would find normal. Here's what happens. He makes some new friends. He eventually gets married. He has a couple of kids, and he has a stable job. How many of you are there at that stage in life? It's like identical to me. 2 kids. He has a stable job. He's married, and he has some friends. Well, I don't have the friends part, but I have the other parts. So I relate to Moses a lot to this stage of life. But here's what we find. Moses kind of goes into just kind of the normal routine of life, assuming he's a godly man. So he's living a normal life, making godly decisions, but nothing real special for 35 plus years of his life. But then one day, everything changes in his walk with God. God calls him out of his routine, and he says, I want to do something special with you. And it's at that point that Moses is confronted with fears. Not just one fear, with many fears. And we're going to see those come up. Here's how it starts in chapter 3. What happens is Moses is now in his routine. He's established this new life. He's out with his flocks. He's tending his sheep or goats or whatever else. And he's just kind of out in the wilderness doing what he does on a daily basis, watching him, leading them the food, leading them the water, doing his normal routine. And it's at this point, out of the corner of his eye, he sees a burning bush out in the distance. And it says it's intriguing enough that he walks over and he looks at this burning bush. And when he gets there, he's kind of shocked because it's burning, but it's not burning up. Meaning there's flames burning from it, but it's not getting charcoaled. It's not burning up. It still looks like a regular bush. Nothing's burning on it, but there's flames coming from it. And he finds it shocking and intriguing. And this is at the point where God speaks to him for the first time, where God clearly speaks to Moses in his life. And here's what it says, starting in verse 7. It says, "Then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt." If you weren't here last week, they are slaves now, and they are being mistreated horribly by the Egyptians. And it says, "I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt." So the first time God talks to Moses, he says this, "Hey, Moses, I know you like tending the flocks, but here's what's happening. I'm sending you back to Egypt, and you're going to free my people." How's that for your day story? God spoke to me in a burning bush and told me, I'm not tending sheep anymore. I get to go back, and I'm going to free all the Israelites, about 2 million of them, from slavery from the Egyptians. That's what he is told. Here's Moses' response when he hears that. It says, "But Moses protested to God." Protested to God. Okay? "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" His first response and his first fear you see is this, and it's a very common one, which is this: why would you want me? Why would you want me? This tends to be our natural first response when God calls us to serve, is we sit there and go, why would you want me? Being a minister who has to ask people to do things from time to time, or serve or to lead new things, one of the things you will find is people's natural reaction a lot of times is, why would you pick me? That's Moses. Moses is going, you're telling me I'm going to go free all the Israelites out of the oppression of the Egyptians? Why me? Why would you choose me? And here's what it says. It says, God reassures him with this, and God says, Moses, I'll be with you. I am picking you, and I will be with you. Here's the other interesting thing. When you read the scriptures, God uses the same phrase of comfort time and time again throughout the Old Testament into the New Testament. Time and time again, when our fears hit us, his first thing he always says almost to a T is this: I'll be with you. Think about the Great Commission. When he tells you, go into all the world, make new disciples, what's the last thing he says? Be surely of this: I will be with you until the end of your days. He says this time and time again, which is, you're not alone. I will be with you when I ask you to do something. So God reassures him, I'll be with you. Here's Moses' next response in verse 13. It says, but Moses protested, if I go to the people of Israel and tell them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? Here's fear number 2. Fear number 2 becomes this: I just don't have knowledge. I lack knowledge, God. You're sending me to go do this thing, but I lack the knowledge. I can't do it because I don't know what to say. What am I supposed to say? And how many of you have ever felt this way before when you hear you were supposed to go out and you were supposed to share your faith? What's the number one fear? This is what I hear from almost all of you from that. I don't know what to say. I don't have the right knowledge. What if they ask me a question I don't know how to answer? Moses' exact response: God, they're going to ask me, what's his name? Who sent me? What am I supposed to say to him? And God gives them an answer. Here's what God says. It says, God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel: I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel: Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. So what God does to reassure him of this fear is he says, Moses, here's the answer. Here's the knowledge you need. Okay? In the New Testament, for us as Christians, we get, God gives you what? The Holy Spirit. Don't worry about what you're going to say. The Holy Spirit will tell you what you need to say and lead you to say what you need to say, and he'll take care of it. God's saying the same thing. Here's the information you need. Now, the next part of the story kind of goes like this, and I'm going to summarize this because it's kind of a long part. God gives him the plan and what to expect next. This is the next part. So he says, go do all this stuff. He says, what am I supposed to say? Who sent me? And he says, here's who I am. Tell them this. And then he says, now here's the plan. Here's what you can expect to happen. And here's the plan God tells him. He says, first thing you need to do, you need to head back to Egypt. When you get there, you get the leaders, the elders of the Israelites together, and you tell them that I have sent you back to them. And he says, what will happen is they will accept you. They will say, okay, we believe you are from God. And then he says, then you need to take them with you, the leaders and you need to go before Pharaoh, and you need to tell Pharaoh, release my people. Let my people go. Release my people so they can go worship God. And then he says, and I want you to know, Moses, he's not going to let you go. He's not going to let you go. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to perform a lot of miracles. And I'm going to display my power to the Egyptians and to my people. And I'm going to display all these miracles over a period of time. And then he says, and after I'm done with all those, he's going to let you go. And the Egyptians are going to give you all their wealth. And you're going to exit out wearing all their wealth. They're just going to hand it to you. And you're going to leave the land. So God says, here's kind of plan. Here's what you can expect is going to happen. Here it is, Moses. Now the thing is, we have a very similar situation as Christians today. And it's called the New Testament. Okay? The New Testament very much lays out for us what the expectation is and what the plan is for our lives and what we can kind of expect. That there's going to be some good things we can expect and some bad things we can expect. But the New Testament kind of lays out a plan and what you can expect to come forward. And the reason I tell you that is this. Before the law existed, the law is the Ten Commandments and all that. Before the law existed, God worked through individuals. So you have individuals, you have like Noah, you have Abraham, you have Moses. You have these big individuals that God worked through to kind of accomplish his plan. After the law is given through Moses, he kind of gives the law out, and from that point on, God starts working through a nation, and he starts working through Israel, okay? Then you have Christ arrive on the scene. And after Christ arrives in his resurrection, his ascension to heaven, the next thing we see is that God starts working through all of us that are going to be willing participants, meaning that we're willing to let him work through us. God then goes, just like Moses, I now will work through all of you to accomplish my plans, to accomplish my will on this earth. So I look at that and go, we are very much just like Moses. Like Moses gets a plan and expectations, as New Testament Christians, God has given us the plan, and here's what you can expect. Very similar situation. That leads us into chapter 4. In chapter 4, what we see is this. He now receives his plan. He receives these expectations. And what you find from Moses is this. He's not really excited. Okay, that's the best way I can say it. He's not a happy camper hearing what God expects from him. And here's what he says in verse 1 of chapter 4. He says, but Moses protested again. What if they don't believe me or listen to me? What if they say the Lord never appeared to you? Here's his third fear. What if they think I'm crazy? And I come back and go, oh, God spoke to me and I'm supposed to leave you. And they all go, dude, are you a nut? Who are you? Moses, we only know who you are. Who are you? He's going, what if they think I'm crazy? Have you had that fear before as a Christian? What if I say this and they think I'm crazy? What if I live this way and they think I'm crazy? That's Moses' fear here, is what if they think I'm crazy. And what God does here is he displays his power. And he does two things to Moses. He says, Moses, what's in your hand? And he goes, I got this staff that I'm walking around with my sheep. And he goes, throw it on the ground. So he throws it on the ground and it says it becomes a snake. And it says Moses, kind of interesting when you read the text, it says he jumps back. Like, how many of you are scared of snakes like I am? Okay, he throws it on the ground and says he kind of jumps back. Now, you could say it was poisonous, but I'm thinking it's probably just like a gardener snake. Like something that's not even venomous, because he just doesn't like snakes, and I'd be the same way. I'd be like back over there like, nice God. But then he says, go pick it up. So he has to sneak back over. This is how I picture it, like him sneaking back over and being like, grabbing the tail, and I want to do it. I'm sorry. I want to go camping, and I want to be grabbing a snake. But Moses is a better man than me, okay? So it says he goes over, and as soon as he grabs the tail, it goes back into a snake, or back into the staff, and he picks it up. He says, Moses, do this. Take your hand and stick it in your jacket. So he sticks it in his jacket, and he says, pull it back out, and it pulls it back out, and it says some type of disease, but probably like a leprosy or something, where his hand's rotting like leprosy. And he looks at it, and he says, put it back in your jacket, and he puts it back in, and he pulls it back out, and it's back to normal. And he displays his power to him, and he says, Moses, I'm God. Okay, if I'm calling you to do this, stop worrying about they think you're crazy about this or that or this, whatever. I'm God. Look at what I can do. You would think at this point, Moses would go, okay, I'm ready to pack up and let's go. That's not the case, okay? Here's what Moses does. In verse 10 it says, but Moses pleaded with the Lord. Oh, Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been, and I am not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied, and my words get tangled. Fear number 4, I don't have the skills to do what you're asking me to do. Been there? God, you're calling me to do that. I don't have the skills to do it. I can't do that. I'm not the guy. I don't have the skills to do that one. Okay, that is Moses' response at that point. This is where God starts to get a little bit irritated. On excuse number 4, finally you get God who starts going, starting to get a little ticked off with you, Moses. Okay, how much more do you want me to do? And he says this. He says kind of the same thing he said to Job, if you read the book of Job. He says, then the Lord asked Moses, Moses, who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak, hear or do not hear, see and do not see? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you in what to say. So God basically says to him, Moses, remember who you're talking to. I'm the creator of the universe. If I tell you to go do this, stop making up excuses because I can empower you to do anything. I make people speak. I make people be silent. I make people see. I make people not see. Would you just shut up and go do what I told you to do? That's basically what he's saying to Moses. And here is the shocking response of Moses's. He says in verse 13, he says, but Moses again pleaded. Third time he pleaded. Pleading means like going, please God, don't. Okay, it's not just like a nonchalant little, he's pleading with God, and he says, Lord, please send someone else. Send anyone else. What I see as his fifth fear is this. He's just scared. Okay, understand, at some point, he left Egypt under the threat of death because the Egyptians want him dead. 40 years later, when God's calling him back, when it all boils down to everything at the end, his final fear is this: I'm scared. Send somebody else. I really can't do this, God. I really don't want to be the one you're calling. Send somebody else. And you see just fear set in on him. And when I first read this, I was kind of shocked. Because I'm thinking, man, when he did the whole hand thing and the staff thing, I'd be like, okay, we're ready to go. Moses goes like 2 better. Keeps pushing God. And I was shocked. But then I sat back and I went, am I really a whole lot different? Really? Am I really a whole lot different than what Moses is doing? Do I not, every time God tries to call me out of my comfort zone, try to find a way to stay in my comfort zone and to come up with excuses why I need to stay there and not follow God and leave in faith and go do something that I can't predict? Isn't that what you do? It's what I do. It's my natural reaction. How do I stay in the comfort and the routine because I like it here, because I know what to expect? And what you see from Moses is Moses fights to his death going, how do I not get out of my comfort zone? How can I just stay here with my family, with the sheep and the goats and lay in the field, rather than go back and ask what you're asking me to do? And it's at this point that God finally becomes angry. It's not that he's irritated anymore. He gets angry with Moses. And what he does is he says this: fine, you know what? Moses, I'm going to send your older brother, Aaron, who still lives back there. He's going to start making his way to you, and you're going to meet up with him, and he will speak for you. So what I'm going to do now, because you won't listen to me, is now I will speak to you, you will speak to Aaron, and Aaron will speak to Pharaoh. So he'll kind of be the in-between guy. That way you don't have to speak directly to Pharaoh, and you have no more excuses. Now just go do what I told you to do. And it's at this point Moses finally prepares everything, gets ready to leave to head back to Egypt to begin the work that God has called him to do. What you see is this: after you choose to walk with God, after you choose to be associated with God, what happens is next in your relationship with God is God will call you to specific things, and at that point, when he asks you to step out of faith in the service to him, fear will strike you. Fear will strike you. And we naturally look for excuses to avoid it, not see it, or go, God, could you use someone else to accomplish the same thing so I don't have to be the one? That's what we naturally do, just like Moses. Moses' excuses, again, that you can relate to, I think, is this: who am I to be used? What if I don't have the right knowledge? What if I can't answer the questions? What if people think I'm crazy? What if I don't have the skills? What if I'm just, God just pointed, I'm just scared. I don't want to do it. Here's what's really cool. When you skip ahead several chapters that we'll get to later, but when you skip ahead several chapters and you get into the 10 plagues, this is amazing when you read it. It's a very cool thing knowing who Moses was and this excuse-making process he went through. You skip ahead and you will see the first several plagues. It is Aaron speaking to Pharaoh. So Moses tells Aaron, Aaron goes before Pharaoh, and then Aaron tells Pharaoh what God has told Moses, and he kind of tells Pharaoh what's going on, all right? You skip ahead several of them, and through that transition, Moses starts to see God's miracles, and he starts to see God provide, and God can be trusted. And what you start to see is, like, and I think in the last, 5 plagues, it's no longer Aaron speaking to Moses. When you look at the scriptures, it ends up being Moses speaking directly to Pharaoh, and he becomes very point-blank blunt with him. And what you see is you see a guy start to form confidence as he walks more and more with God, to the point that he goes, my fears that were once my fears aren't my fears anymore, and I'm a confident guy before Pharaoh now speaking for God. And it's an amazing transition when you read the accounts. You see, the more you walk in faith with God, the easier it is to release your fears. The more you walk with him, the easier it gets to just let your fears be behind you. For instance, the only way I could, or the best way I could think of illustrating this whole lesson this morning is this. It's like learning to swim, okay? Most human beings, there's a few exceptions, most human beings and water do not mix when we are born, okay? We don't like water. It's not a natural fit. We see it as potentially scary because it can drown us. But most of us in here, how many of you can swim in here? Almost all of us at some point learned to swim, okay? I get to see this again now with my second kid that I saw with my first one, but I get to see it with Liberty. So she's 4 now, but her transition with water is astounding, okay? 2 years ago, getting her in the bathtub was work, okay? Because she was scared to death of water. So you literally had to convince her to get in the tub every time you had to bathe her. And then she would always ask for days leading up to it, do I have to take a bath today? And you'd be like, no. And she'd be like, yay. And then the day you said yes, she'd be like, ugh. She'd like, what time is it going to be? And you're like, in the evening. Can I stand up? Yeah, you can stand up. Can you? And it's this whole working process. Why? Because she is scared of the water. Now, this summer, for the first time, we've taken her swimming some and all that, and we go over to my sister's house so she gets to spend time with her cousins. Last year in the pool, petrified. Beginning of the summer this year, I take her in the pool. She clings on to me and just holds on to me, won't let her go. And then you slowly kind of put her in some inflatable things and stuff like that. Now she's at the point she'll go over and she'll get in a little inflatable thing by herself, or we can put the little wingies on her. Hopefully it will be the next stage. And she'll get in the water and she enjoys it and loves being there in the pool. And you're going, but that's a learned behavior through learning trust over time, going, I can survive in this water. Most of us, when we go swimming, we do it for what? Enjoyment. Why? We enjoy it. I guarantee you, when you were 2 years old, you didn't see it as enjoyment. You saw it as fear. Your faith walk is very similar. Is when you start out and the first time God calls you to do something that's out of the norm, out of the routine, it's scary. And you come up with excuse after excuse after excuse. But once you take the leap and start getting past your fears, what happens is this. The fears start to become things of the past, and you start to enjoy it. And you actually start to learn to swim. And you become a swimmer that actually enjoys that process. And as a Christian, what used to be fearful to you becomes enjoyable. Because you see yourself doing kingdom work. You see yourself doing the things God calls you to do, and you're seeing yourself having an eternal impact on the people around you. So this morning, here's my question I want you to think about. What fears are you holding on to? What fears do you have right now that are holding you back from being the kingdom worker that God desires in your life? Which of those do you use constantly? Go, God, it's not me you're actually calling. God, I don't have the knowledge. God, I'm scared. God, what if they think I'm crazy? What is the fear you hold on to that stops you from being the person God calls you to be? That's what I want you to think on. And I want you to know this, to become a productive kingdom worker for Jesus Christ, you have to be able to learn to release your fears and let them go and go, I'm heading back to Egypt. I'm going back to do what you call me to do, Lord. And then that's where you start to see the real fun take place in your relationship with God. Would you pray with me?